Okay, Chloe, we are live. You can go.
Great, thank you. Welcome everyone to Product People Meetup. We have Till Westermann here focusing on the experimentation in product management at DeepL or DeepL, depends on which camp you're in. Till and I have already had a bit of contention over that as to how to pronounce it. So curious to know from everyone watching how you choose to pronounce it. Personally, for me, it's DeepL. A little about myself. I work with product people. I'm a product manager here, and we work with a range of B2B, B2C clients, which you'll learn about in a moment. We have a growing product community, which is now 6,000 people plus, going strong. And our role is that we step in on short-term engagements as interim product managers with big companies. Some of these you have probably heard of. So Zalando is one of my clients. We share Omeo, Dr. Smile, and so on. All right, so we want to kick off and actually get to know who's here, and we have a bit of a poll. For those of you on Zoom, you'll see a pop-up come up, and for the rest, you can drop your answers in the comments if you're on the other platforms. I think, Mansoor, you're going to help with this, right? Our first question is talking about growth. How many experiments does your company start per week? Is it 0? Is it 1 to 2, 3 to 10, or 10 plus? And you should see a pop-up arise at some point.
Yes, I see it. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, just a reminder, if you're on YouTube or one of the other platforms, you can just drop your answer in the comment and we'll see it come through.
I'm going to give about 30 seconds more for people to have the time to answer. For those who still couldn't answer or couldn't find it, there's a poll pop-up, or it could appear on the bottom bar of your Zoom screen.
One from LinkedIn.
Yeah, the other platforms are actually quite active today. Already see answers.
Maybe
right,
one more minute.
Yeah.
Do we have enough?
I mean, yeah, it's 4 out of 8 people on Zoom. I think some are still not connected, and because I mean, if you subtract you, Till, and myself, then I guess that's fair enough. That's a high participation rate. So I'm going to end the poll and share the results. I don't know if you can see them, Chloe.
Let's check.
Otherwise, let me read them for you if you don't want to remove your screen.
Yeah, I can't see it on mine right now.
Yeah, sure, no problem. So, okay, for the first question, how many experiments does your company start per week? 50% said 0. These are the results on Zoom, by the way. And 50% said between 3 and 10. Whereas on the other platforms, I think, yeah, the majority was also saying A. So I see a couple of A's. Justin on YouTube said it's a B. So it's 1 to 2. Yeah, so I think the majority has a low number of experiments, let's put it that way. And then for question number 2, what do you think are the most common pitfalls of experimentation? So on Zoom, I see 75% that said not experimenting enough. And then 25% that said slow assessment of the results. And then 75%, again, because it's a multiple choice question, also said the inability to measure what you're optimizing on. And on the other platforms, I think for the question number 2, they mostly said D. So D is, again, the inability to measure what you're optimizing on. And then someone said B as well. So, okay, so it's kind of similar to what we're seeing here on Zoom.
Interesting.
Great. So
okay.
Yeah,
so it sounds like there's
kick off.
a lot of room for additional experiments or experimenting more by the sounds of it. Great. I've skipped ahead here, have I? Am I missing? Sorry about that, Till.
It's still
there we are.
are.
With that, Till, we'd love to hand over to you. Till is a senior product manager at DeepL, and he'll chat to you about his background and give you a bit of an introduction to himself. So I'll hand over to you, Till.
Yes. Shall I share my screen, or would you like to? Yeah.
Yes, please.
Cool. Thank you. Let me just go here. Sorry about this. Okay, you should see my screen.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, cool. Then welcome everyone. Hello, I'm Till. This is me. I have a background in chemistry and physics. Did a PhD in theoretical quantum dynamics back then, many years in university. Worked a bit in consulting. I worked for Trivago and joined DeepL in the beginning of 2020. In DeepL, I'm responsible for the data engineering and warehousing part, metrics, and the data science part, which comprises experimentation, user segmentation, the recommended systems, and churn prediction stuff. When I'm not working, I like to climb, mostly sport climbing, a bit of track climbing for people who were into this. Yeah, on the left-hand side, you can see a picture of me at a crack. And yeah, this is pretty much me. And yeah, thanks for inviting me today, and thanks for the opportunity to tell a bit of what we're doing and how we do it. Cool. I'd like to start very very general. Why experiment at all? I mean, usually you make an observation, or you have an idea, and this observation leads you to an hypothesis. And an hypothesis might be true or it might not be true. And the only way to figure this out is to run an experiment. And this is actually not just in product management. This is like in general science, or most of the time also in real life. And then the experiment will give you a result, and this will lead to an observation, and perhaps you have new hypothesis then. Personally, I think that if you really want to do hypothesis testing and learn something, the way you want to do it is to run a proper A/B experiment or an A/B test. I mean, classically, some people also like to do like a pre-post analysis, where you have something before, and then you release something, and then you just look at how the numbers change. And sometimes this might work, especially when you have very, very strong signals. But usually it's really tedious to correct for seasonality, other strange effects, moon phase, whatever might happen to you. You basically have to correct for a lot of factors. And even if you do this, like detecting small changes is probably not really possible. So, and yeah, I must say, yeah, it's just a small change. But if you lose like 3% 10 times, then you have a problem, but you don't know why you have a problem. And like 3% on a metric that's fluctuating a lot is easy to miss. And even if you have millions of visits every day, then yeah, this might happen. And I think that the last argument is probably even stronger. When you scale an organization and you're doing many changes every day, because you're constantly releasing changes and you're constantly trying out stuff, then going for like pre and post analysis is completely impossible, because you make so many changes that it simply gets yeah, unpractical. So I think, from my point of view, a proper way to test your hypothesis is by running proper A/B tests or experiments. And if you want to do this, from my point of view, you basically have two building blocks if you want to do this properly. One is a technical framework. You have to be able to measure things. And one is the culture within your organization that works with this technical framework. And from my point of view, they are nearly equally important. One without the other is probably doomed for failure. And I'd like to, the main thing of this talk will be talking about these 2 points and trying to give you some hints of what we built, how we do it, and when we introduce it, what, from my point of view, are important parts. So I like to start with a technical framework, not saying that, as I said, it's mostly equally important. When you look at the technical part, it falls down to 2 parts. Again, one is tracking and one is the experimentation infrastructure. I would heavily recommend tying them together and not having them separately. Yeah, let's start with a tracking one. The setup at DeepL works pretty much like this, that we have a bunch of APIs, which we use for tracking events from platforms. And these platforms might be deepl.com, or Windows app, or Macintosh app, Lingui, which is also still run by DeepL, or other platforms. And then the client on the platform, for instance, a web browser, sends events to the API. The API receives the stuff, sends this to Kafka, which is our event streaming platform we use. From there, we send it to ClickHouse, which is the data warehouse we use. And then we have a scheduling engine for recurring tasks, which we call Sisyphus, which does recurring tasks on the data we have. This is basically a wrapper around Argo workflows, nothing very fancy. I'm pretty proud about the system. It doesn't look like much. But what we have done here is that, for instance, if front end, so like the website implements a new event, which happens basically all the time, we basically have a single source of truth for all events, which is maintained in Google Protobuf. It's a file with a fixed format. And if someone wants to implement an event, they have to amend this file, which is then reviewed and like versionized in Git. And with having a structured definition of the events, we get automated validation of events in the APIs because we know what we have to expect. When writing from Kafka to ClickHouse, we automated the creation of database schemas. So basically, whenever an event needs additional data or something like this, that all the columns in the database are directly created. We create the end user documentation directly from the implementation, which is always up to date, because if you don't merge your if you don't merge the event definition, it will never be live. And so whatever is live is also documented. And we can test the whole pipeline. It's directly available for queries, aggregations, whatever you want. We did this back then because the team was very small. When we started with this, the team size was 3 people, including myself. And we said, okay, there are many more developers. And basically a tool that creates manual work for us doesn't scale. So we pretty much automated the whole workflow. I'm pretty proud about the system, and we're running it now for like 18 months, and it still scales very well. It's still in very well order, and we still know which events we have and where to look them up if we forget about it. And then, as I said, there's tracking, and then there's the experimentation infrastructure. And a bit of the experimentation infrastructure. DeepL.com is a static web page. It's served by a minimal backend. there's a service, another service to handle the actual translations, which is called by the front end. And for the page below, which is the main translator, which we call it, every change on this website is an experiment. So there's no change to this website which is not experimented upon. Same goes for the funnel of the self-checkout for the subscription part. Of course, where it doesn't count as like blog posts. I mean, if you write a blog post, then write a blog post. But on the main critical things, we experiment on everything, even if it's a change in the footer. We want to know what's going on. Then on the infrastructure side for experimentation, the whole thing is done on-prem in the European Union. There's no third-party software involved. I mean, of course, we use the before-mentioned tools like Kafka or ClickHouse, but everything runs on-prem on our own servers, which is very important for data protection reasons for us. Clients trust us with very sensitive informations when they translate things, and we make sure that nothing ever leaves the European Union. What people enter, of course, we have CDNs for images, but nothing of this stuff in the CDNs is ever critical. The whole segmentation and filtering for experimentation is done server-side. And as it's done server-side, all the information is available in our backend systems before page delivery. This also enables us to experiment on recommender models or different things in the backend, which is very nice. And of course, if it's available before page delivery, we can change literally anything on this website. There's no restriction on what we can experiment on. The whole analysis part is written based on ClickHouse and Python. Nothing super fancy, just from my point of view, executed very well. In experimentation, we report a fixed set of metrics, which we consider the most important ones, and usually are enough to explain what's going on in an experiment. But sometimes you need more, especially things you haven't thought about when you started the experiment, because when you started it and then you let it run and you see effects, then you wonder, okay, what is this? And is it different for people who enter more than 500 characters, or you start getting ideas, and then it's super easy to run custom analysis on this stuff. We provide templates for this, and you don't need to be a SQL wizard. You pretty much only need to know how to fill in templates, and you get your you get custom results very easily. Architecture-wise, it's just an extension of what I showed before. This example is for DeepL.com. It's very similar for the apps. Where we also experiment. How this works is that if someone requests the website, this is a browser, they ask the file backend asks the experimentation API, which runs on our servers. The experimentation API knows which experiments are running with which filters from our experimentation service called Scientist, does all the logic, delivers the page. The user sees experiments. We track the user behavior by the web tracking APIs, write it to ClickHouse via Kafka, and then our scheduling engine runs the analysis scripts. It asks the experimentation service for which experiments it should look in the data, and then runs all the analysis. And we started simple in the beginning, basically just difference in means, performance, p-values, and then went complex later on with confidence intervals, power analysis, and stuff like this. We use Metabase for visualization, but I think it doesn't really matter. You can use whatever you want. Some stats. We started experimenting heavily in the front ends about 12 months ago, perhaps a bit more. We ran about 250 experiments in the last 12 months. Around 30 to 40 were successful, which is a pretty high rate. It went down last month as we optimized more and more. That's naturally but that's roughly the scale we are operating on. Okay, so much for the technical part. In a nutshell, this is how our framework looked like and how we do it. The second part, as I said, nearly equally important, is the cultural aspect. And I would just like to summarize a few learnings when we introduced the experimentation framework in DeepL. This was interestingly done mainly by the design lead and myself. So it was the two of us driving this heavily in the company. That was very cool combo, because she was also very, very data driven and used to experimentation, and we were really driving this forward. And what I'd like to share is some learnings when we introduced this, what from my point of view worked really well, and what you could also try out when you either introduce this yourself or you try to improve the experimentation culture within your organization. First part is give guidance on how to optimize. You can probably measure a lot, and you have a lot of metrics, and all of this is cool. But I would strongly recommend defining some sort of hierarchy in your metrics. So what do you really want to optimize for? What are your North Star metrics? And what is just secondary? So what I want to say is avoid optimization of micro conversions. It's really easy to get people to other website, just make buttons bigger or blink or whatever. But probably having people on some page doesn't add a lot of value. So really make sure that you're measuring the end of the funnel, or something that where you think that this is actually an indicator for that your feature creates more value. It's fine to look at secondary metrics and to report them. We do this as well, but they are mainly used to explain what you see in the main metrics, and not to make decisions upon them. Also, something that is fun and interesting to think about is what do you do when experiments have no effect? So, DeepL has millions of sessions every day, so we have a lot of data for experimentation. And of course, we run experiments which have absolutely no effect. And say, yeah, seems like no one cares if we do this or not. No effect on what people enter, no effect on people's retention or whatever. And yeah.
Do you just deploy it in that instance, or you depends?
It depends on you. Sometimes it is part of a journey that leads to something which you actually want to do, and you don't want to do a big change, but you want to do it controlled in many iterations. And then you might say, okay, I can do this step and I don't destroy anything. But sometimes especially when you add something and it doesn't change something, I would rather not add it. Adding something to a page that no one cares is just something that adds more complexity. And then it can break, or the code base gets worse, or more things to consider when you do designs, and I'd rather keep it simple. But this might differ from organization to organization. But it's an interesting exercise of where you want to go. Yeah, it's easy to make changes which have no effect. So. Then one other thing is that don't let experimentation be a black box. And I think that's for acceptance, it's a super interesting point. And a few things to avoid this. First of all, make results visible for everyone all the time. It shouldn't be like you need some permissions to view the results of your experiments, or you need the special login or whatever. Make it available somewhere where everyone can log in and everyone can view the results all the time. Then one thing that greatly helped increasing acceptance was explain the technical framework to developers. So this is not, at least in DeepL, this is not some random third-party tool which we plug into our website, which does something, and then somewhere there are results. But this is something your colleagues build. Is the colleagues for you to have a beer with, and like this is just another part of backend, or it's just another backend system with a bit of statistics on top. And this is not some weird things from outside of the universe. This is what your colleagues built, and this is, we know what we're doing, and we just want to make the product better. And I mean, of course, you can just explain all the internal details and whatever, and that that greatly helped to increase trust and acceptance. Then one thing that worked really well is make devs interested in the outcome. If people actually care what the impact of their work is, they are very motivated from my point of view, but also they look at stuff and they find stuff, and they sometimes know but weird things in the product. And yeah, that was really cool when we managed this. Also, teach statistical knowledge and how to interpret results to a wider audience. So do workshops on this, give examples, experiments. The more people understand how to read results and how to interpret results and how to make decisions, the less black boxy it is. It's not just something that you run and then product decided something. There's actually some logic to it. And that really helped. And what we also did in the beginning as well was to have public discussions on experiments. And in these meetings, we decided what we want to do with them, which was sometimes very easy. Okay, they were just awesome, and yeah, we do it, it's clear. But we also had a look of why they actually work. And if something didn't work, we had a look at what we think there is. And we're also generating hypotheses in these meetings for future experiments, what we could test. And many of the stuff was built, so people really felt they had an impact. In these public discussions, we started the culture a lot. But actually, we did this for a couple of months, and then the teams were mostly doing this internally because it scaled better. But at least in the beginning, it helped to have like a few people there, which are also doing live analysis on like custom stuff, and then like discussing for an hour, brainstorming what might actually be happening in this experiment. What experiment can we run to validate this? And yeah, this was a lot of fun. And then last but not least is if you introduce something like this, make sure that experiments are set up properly. If people, product people, design, whoever designs experiments, if they need help in the beginning, discuss every experiment with them. I think it's time really invested wisely. After a few months, people will probably get the hang of it, and they don't need so much help anymore, but especially in the beginning, like defining an hypothesis up front, defining the outcome up front, like what is in the proper, like teaching people what's in the proper hypothesis, saying something, okay, based on data we observed, we believe if we do X, we expect Y, and we notice when Z happens. If you have such a framework, that's very useful. And one thing, make sure it's not an extra step in the development cycle. So it's not just something, yeah, we test it and we in the end it's going to get for 100% anyways, but you would actually, or you just turn it off, but you make sure that you learn something from this experiment. It's not just, yeah, we did it and yeah, it didn't work, yeah, whatever, I don't care. But make sure that we actually learn something even if it fails. It's absolutely no problem when experiments fail. Most of them do. It's completely fine. We just want to learn something from them. And if this is the case, then it's usually time well spent. But if it's just an extra step where you add code and you remove it again, especially for developers, this gets frustrating. And so this is where these public discussions help, because especially developers see, oh, okay, no, this is like, oh, we've done something with this, and we learned something. Okay, it didn't work. That's life. I mean, but we actually, yeah, made an impact to learn something for the company. Okay, just as the last thing, one thing to remember is like iteration is key. Oftentimes things don't work out in the beginning, and especially this can be frustrating at some point. And just one example I like to give from what we've done, something in spring, DeepL released 11 new languages. And before this, like our language selector, which you select the language you want to translate to, looked like this. It was a list. It was optimized before. We ran some experiments on this old design, and it was working very nicely. But then with like 11 additional languages, this was not working anymore. And of course, you want to change it, but if you want to, of course, we ran experiments on it. And then in the end, this was the old design, and this is what you currently see live on DeepL.com. And you imagine it came on. It cannot be so hard to develop such a switch, as a language switch. This actually cost us 5 iterations. And most of the iterations were getting closer to where we wanted, but for many we couldn't see, okay, it's not working. But we could actually learn why it's not working. And then, yeah, we just took some iterations, and now we have a working solution until we probably add more languages at some point, and then we need to iterate again. But just don't see it as a frustrating thing where your experiments fail and you get in your face from your dashboards because they say negative numbers. Yeah, we learned a lot how people use these kind of menus and how you have to structure them so that they actually get used effectively. And especially if something has been optimized before, getting out of it is usually hard, and that's a normal process. And yeah, I think we learned a lot, and this is, I think this is what counts in the end. With this, I'd actually come to an end. One thing that I haven't explained is if it's DeepL or DeepL, and if you would do a poll in DeepL, you'd probably get 50-50. So I think like 50% of people say DeepL, the other 50 say DeepL. I think it's pretty random across different languages, so whatever you prefer. With this, thanks for your attention and thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Till. I'll just take over sharing again. Cool. So we are up to Q&A, but I'll give you a few minutes to think about what your questions are and to start sending them through on the chat on whichever platform you're watching from. And in the meantime, I'll take you through just a little bit of background information about us at Product People. So we step in at various times or various use cases. We typically come in when people are growing or scaling, parental leave, if they're off for a period of time, perhaps a PM is leaving, or they might have a particular project or initiative that they need help with. So we step in multiple cases, but these are some of the most common ones. We are very thankful and grateful to get some really great feedback from our lovely clients. Yeah, we are experts at onboarding fast and getting to know the team and the product really, really quickly, and to work on delivering value early. This is some of our fantastic product managers and community manager, Mansoor, as well in here. So you might see some of our faces on these calls, and you feel free to reach out to any of us on LinkedIn as well. We are also hiring, so we're looking for product managers. So if you are interested in product management, please reach out to us. You'll find us on productpeople.join.com, or again, some of you are already joining us from LinkedIn, so you'll be able to find more information there. And we're also looking for a talent acquisition manager to help us with that, because within the company, we're scaling very quickly and we need help to get the right people to join us. So back to the Q&A. Let's see if anyone's dropping in their questions. So please feel free to put them in the chat. I have one tool to kick things off. I mean, just to give, we saw that a lot of people joining don't have experience with experimentation in their company. Can you give an example of like the scale of experiments from something that's quite a micro change through to a really big bet? Like what's the diversity of scale there?
I mean, of course, like the smallest changes we've done was just color of buttons. It's like I mean, what happens if we change the color of this button? What happens then? Which is probably like 2 lines of code or something, and then off it goes. And then I think the biggest changes I can talk about are complete redesign, like completely switching frameworks for the website, like basically technical migrations, and basically everything in between, like launching new features, launching new sub features. Yeah.
And in terms of like a time frame, obviously changing a few lines of code is very fast versus, I assume, multiple months for some of these bigger ones.
Yeah, I mean, like development time is obviously varies a lot depending on what you build, and I actually don't have a good overview about how long each feature takes, because oftentimes I'm just, someone of us does some consulting in the beginning if they know what that can measure what they want to measure if it's necessary, and then sometimes before to go live. But I mean, DeepL has many teams working on the front end or different parts of the website, and usually don't necessarily have a good overview of how long every individual implementation takes. Sure,
makes sense. Also about setting, you mentioned about setting culture. It's not just technical, there's the culture piece as well. I've found like often with growth, you're the team or the person that's typically kind of getting in the way of product and design and people. How do you set that culture so that it's really embedded and that people are prepared, that you're not kind of seen to be interrupting development work or interrupting higher priorities?
As an experimentation tool, or
yeah, like growth and experimentation. So I've seen some product teams, for example, when you say, okay, we need to run this experiment and we need to change the color of a button, they might go, oh, we have this other stuff we're working on. How do you get it to be a priority within the company?
Okay. Okay. So perhaps perhaps I just clarify my role. So my role is to provide the platform to run experiments on. I mean, it's obviously the infrastructure, and then like all the calculation of the metrics, statistical part, and so on and so forth. But it's very seldom that I actually run any experiment myself, because that's the backlog of the team. So for instance, there is a team running, like developing the main page, which is on DeepL.com. And I wouldn't go to them saying, I want you to run this experiment. They have their own backlog, they have their own roadmap, and they have their own ideas what they want to do. They have their own OKRs. And of course, they kind of pitch ideas. I mean, it's probably, as in every good organization, you can go to people and say, hey, have you thought about this? And sometimes say, hey, yeah, cool. But I cannot really enforce anything they do.
Sure. Yeah.
And so they work on their own stuff, and basically everything they do, they put in experiments. So when they work on a feature or they try to improve something, they think of, okay, how can we, as I said, like, what's the hypothesis we have, and what can we build to validate this hypothesis? And so I think this is also like, but it probably feels less threatening for teams, because teams pretty much work self-sustained within the company, and they can pretty much do whatever they want, because it's 100% transparent what they do in the experimentation tool. And in the end, they can just prove success by saying, yeah, we have run these experiments, they were successful, we improved these metrics, which is successful, and you can just let people run because everyone sees what people are doing.
Nice. Cool. I think we have a few questions coming in from LinkedIn, Mansoor. I can't see them on my end, so maybe you can help me to share them.
Sure, no problem. So let me relay the questions. I'm going to start off with one from YouTube, actually, from Stefan. He's asking, have you ever experienced in practice a situation where neither A nor B had an effect, but A and B did? And if so, do you repeat tests over time to guard against these compounding effects?
Okay. If I hope I understand the question right. So for us, how it works is that A is status quo, and B is your hypothesis. And of course, it happens that there's no difference between A and B. I mean, small changes when you add something very small, but no one uses and it doesn't hurt anyone, then doesn't get in your way, whatever. Yeah, I mean, this is what I discussed earlier. In this case, sometimes you say, okay, we take this change because it leads to a change which we actually want, and it's just an intermediate step. And sometimes you say, yeah, didn't work. There's no feature acceptance, or it's not used. Then no, we don't add additional complexity. And the running experiments later in time is something, I mean, exactly the same is we haven't done, because usually when an experiment is switched off and we made a decision, it's you remove from code base. Otherwise, your code base gets very horrible and unmaintainable. But it happens that, I mean, I've seen it with other organizations that you actually 1 or 2 years later, you think, oh, okay, actually the behavior of people might have changed on the internet. Perhaps now this is actually something that works because more and more people are adopting this, and people are more used to the style. And there's something I've seen in other organizations, but at DeepL we haven't done it yet.
Okay, thank you. So yes, Stefan replied and said, in my scenario, A and B are independently developed features, potentially a month apart. But I guess you answered it by explaining that it's not really the case for you. Moving on to another one. Go ahead, please.
Jump in there. If you basically have like 2 independently developed features, you would run 2 experiments in them. So every one of these features would be its own experiment. This is probably how you would tackle this.
All right. Yeah, makes sense. Thank you for that. And Stefan, if I hope this answered your question. If you'd like to leave any additional feedback, please feel free to do so. We have another Stefan on LinkedIn that was asking, well, first of all, he's thanking you for the great talk. And he's asking, how do you go about defining the standard metrics you use in experiments? Who is involved, and how do you make sure you're measuring the right things, unquote, to increase user value?
Okay. So we did this in the product team. We sat together and said, okay, what do we actually want to optimize this product for? And what we think is a success. It was actually not a monolithic thing. We started very simple, saying, okay, there are certain things. For instance, on DeepL, we say that if people copy the result of the translation, that is definitely a good sign. Because it means that we translated something which was so good that you probably use it somewhere else. And if you would really use a crappy translation, people would not do this, because then they'd probably say, okay, yeah, I'd rather go to Google Translate and try my luck there. And so this was in the beginning. We sat down and said, okay, what are the standard things which we should optimize for every time? And this was a product effort. Some of the senior developers were also involved, because they had a lot of knowledge about the product and also very high involvement in the product. And then over the time, we refined this. So in the beginning, as when we started, it was more of like very simple, like performance in some metrics and p-values, and then we actually went to more complicated metrics later on. So currently, the main metric we optimize for is user retention, free user retention.
All right.
And that was,
thank you.
And that is pretty much growth. The better job we do for the users, the more they come back, the more people talk nicely about us, the more we grow, and that's the main goal of the product right now.
Yep. Thank you then for that one. Let's take another one from here, from Zoom maybe. So Anna is asking, how many experiments is it acceptable to run in the same time? I'm concerned about one experiment influencing the result of another experiment.
Yes. So in principle, I mean, currently we run about 30 experiments in parallel on the main website, which I think is far from any problem. We run some statistical analysis, absolutely no problem, power-wise. It gets more tricky, as I said, if they interact strongly. We have done some checking for this. If products really interact, if experiments interact very strongly, and our finding was that we usually overestimate the interaction. So we've done this a few times, like when we're running a lot of experiments to see, okay, do we see in any specific group, do we see interaction patterns? And we pretty much never found them in a statistically significant way. Having said this, there's sometimes the case where you know this will happen, and then you just either you need to extend your framework, saying, okay, these experiments cannot run in parallel, or you have to run them in sequence.
All right, so thank you for your answer, and Anna, thanks you as well. So taking the next one, we've got Bjorn asking, in your example, how do you measure in the end if a new language menu works? So what was the thing that defined that it was successful?
I mean, as I said, the North Star metric would be free user retention, and this is what this should actually influence. Of course, this only goes for people who actually opened the menu. I mean, we filter down the audience, because otherwise someone never opens the menu, then it wouldn't matter. And this is what the North Star metric is. And then we usually look down to further metrics to explain what happened. And for instance, it's a very obvious choice, but here I think this example was an example where we saw, okay, the faster people made the click. So the quicker they could find what they wanted, and the less people pretty much gave up while searching for the language. I mean, it's not only being faster with your click, but it's also actually making a click. And if you make it very confusing, people just give up. I mean, just imagine you have to scroll for 3 minutes to find your language, and then whatever, dude. It's just not that important anymore. And these were secondary metrics which we optimized for. I mean, as I said, this pretty much explains us why something happens, but just optimizing on clicks is not a good idea.
Yeah. Right, and thanks again for that one. Still another one that's Burulele asking, for the statistics part, do you prefer frequentist or Bayesian methods?
Frequentists, actually. At least to be honest, we have not built Bayesian statistics for this framework. I've seen this in another company I work with, and there we had a bit of the same thing. We had just had so much traffic that the advantage of setting priors was priors had no effect if you put enough samples on it, and we just have so much samples that priors usually don't take effect anymore.
Okay, are there any more questions?
I think on checking, making sure of all the platforms, but I think for now that's it. We don't have any other questions. If anyone else has one that wants to say it, verbally here, please feel free to raise your hand or just jump in. Otherwise, I think we're good. So, and we're kind of good on time as well. So thanks again, Till. Thanks everyone for attending and joining. And Chloe, I'll hand it over to you for closure.
Sure, thanks, Mansoor. So, yeah, thanks, Till, so much for joining us. I think there are a few sort of key things that stood out. I like that you said that every change is an experiment, so it's not like a standalone thing. That don't let it be a black box, making results visible for everyone all the time. That you should learn something from every experiment, and that iteration is key. I think that really came through strongly. So yeah, we appreciate your insights and teaching us all about that. So thank you for coming. For everyone here, you can join us every week. You'll find us on meetup.com, and you can also find us on Telegram. And if you're feeling generous, you can support us on Patreon too. So we look forward to seeing you in future sessions, and have a good evening.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Thanks for being such a good host.